Apologize for the darkness of the platform. We got a bug in our light system. It happened just before the first service, and we're going to have to figure out what's going on, but apologize for that. Chris came up and handed me 2 batteries while we were singing. He gave them to me. He said, with the way things are going this morning, I think you might need these. And he's true. You get thrown curveballs, and I forget what all the announcements I have to do and like that. Forgot one earlier. We do have a congregational meeting after this service. Please plan on attending. Need a quorum to be able to pick 2 people that the congregation nominates for the nominating committee. The elders have nominated 2 folks already, and they've accepted, and so we just need to finish that process this morning so we can put the nominating committee to their work for the coming year in the annual business meeting in January. I forgot to announce that earlier, so I'll do that now. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul wrote these words, "All Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work." Now, I believe that and hope that you believe that as well, as we're going to enter another challenging passage of Scripture in Luke's Gospel today. Luke's Gospel is a challenging gospel. He's the evangelist. He's running after his friend Theophilus and others. And so he's challenging in his word. As usual, when I do a sermon, there's a few opening questions that are prompted to help us move along with the passage we're going to be in. The first question today is this: when dining, who's dining at your dinner table? How did they arrive there? What are the etiquette rules, customs, and/or regulations you have when you invite others over to your house for dinner? Do you have any? I've titled the message this morning, Potluck Supper Etiquette. The reason for this title is that Jesus is going to coach heart matters as well as practical matters surrounding the most important connection point in the Jewish, Greco-Roman, Hellenistic culture, the dinner table. And I also wonder if the dinner table is one of the most important connection points for us in our culture, having people over to our house for the purpose of building relationship with them, and the end game of that is that relationship leading to kingdom results, kingdom business. That's our personal commitment, in my opinion, some of our personal commitment to the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. That's why I opened the message this morning with questions about your dinner table. Most likely you do not have many etiquette rules or customs and regulations in a casual meal setting with your friends. On the other hand, if you're putting on a formal dinner, maybe we've seen in our culture maybe a wedding reception or maybe a formal banquet honoring someone, or a fundraiser. There are a whole bunch of rules of etiquette and customs and regulations to follow that are considered proper in a way to honor and not offend people. For instance, my wife has been a wedding planner for years and done a number of weddings. At a wedding, there's usually a head table where the bridal party sits, because they're the host of the event, and specifically the bride and her family are the host in our Western culture. And usually the bride and groom are at the center of that head table because they're the guests of honor as well as the host. And the bridal party that descends out from there in order of importance, I'm putting it that way, and the importance is the relationship with the bride and groom. Typically, for instance, the best man and the matron or maid of honor sit at the immediate sides of the bride and groom, and then the rest of the party out from there. And then near the head table, in a formal setting like that, near the head table, the guests are seated in order of their relationship and the importance of their relationship to bride and groom. Typically, the immediate family is sit closer to the head table, and then extended family, and then it's moved kind of out from there. That's how it takes place here in our culture. It's somewhat the same process at formal dinners and banquets and fundraising. There's usually a head table where the host is seated, and typically seated next to the host of the event is the guest of honor, and then proceeding out from there are potentially the speakers who are going to be on the program for that event and who are going to speak. So with that introduction, then I asked this: why all the discussion about meals and seating etiquette and invitation management and other things that are happening at the dinner or the wedding feast or the banquet or fundraiser? Luke is going to take us for the third time to dinner on the Sabbath as he narrates another sit-down meal with another ruler of the Pharisees in this Jewish, Greco-Roman, Hellenistic culture. In their culture, such meals had become very important status symbols in the social scene of the day. Jesus appears in this meal to be the guest of honor, and he has been invited by the host, the ruler of the Pharisees. In this invite, Jesus is going to address who's invited or should be invited to the table, and how they should handle the invitation from a heart perspective and from, in some ways, proper etiquette. Understanding this theme from a Jewish Greco-Roman cultural perspective will help us to apply the scriptures to our lives, which I opened up with that quote from Paul about scriptures being profitable, because I think we need to wrestle with the passages of scriptures and how they apply in our current day. So here we go. We're going to pick up our text in Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. One Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. Now, we don't know if this scene is immediately following the scene from last week's message, or if there's been some time or distance between these two events. Jesus was under caution from the Pharisees at the threat of Herod, and that remained. But Jesus is doing exactly what he said he was going to be doing. He's continuing his mission till it was time to arrive in Jerusalem. Now, I think that that's a great thing for us to do, contrary to what's going on in our culture. I think it's really important that we stay on mission. We have a tremendous amount of difficulty in our culture today with COVID and what's taking place. But in the middle of all of that threat, Jesus still wants us on mission. He's still on mission, even underneath the threat. And I think that's a great encouragement to us to continue. A couple of more things to notice here in this first verse. The Pharisee is labeled a ruler by Luke, which means that he is most likely well respected as a Pharisee by his colleagues and the community. According to Francois Bovan's commentary on this, there wasn't a leadership hierarchy in the Pharisees, so this ruler title was probably much more of a respectful title to an elder statesman than someone in a rank with the Pharisees, because he'd probably been a Pharisee for an extended period of time. So it's an honorary thing related to his colleagues, those that are around the table. Also notice that Luke mentions that they are watching him. They're still watching Jesus. All those folks sitting around this table are Pharisees and lawyers, and they're still watching Jesus. The Pharisees are still looking to pin something on Jesus, and Luke doesn't want us to forget that, and forget that there's this strained relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees. On the other hand, we should also not forget this about Jesus, that Jesus continued to maintain relationship with the Pharisees, although the relationship was strained. And I believe he did that. He didn't step away from a strained relationship. He actually, I see him in the text, he always steps into a relationship that's strained. And I think part of the reason for that is that Jesus knows perhaps there's someone there that the gospel's going to get to. In fact, we know his thought process related to that with the Pharisees, because Nicodemus from John chapter 3 is a Pharisee. And we know what happened with him. So Jesus steps in, he doesn't step back away. Back to our text, verse 2 in Luke chapter 14. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers. Now, again, when we mention lawyers here, it's the scribes of the Pharisees who wrote the practical law and how it applied the practical steps in application of the law to the lives of people. So that's who's sitting at this table with Jesus. And a Pharisee saying this to him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. And Jesus asked that question, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" And the Pharisees and scribes remained silent. Then he took the man and he healed him and sent him away. And then Jesus said this, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to him. They were quiet. They were silent. Now, Jesus is the guest of honor at the invitation of this ruler of the Pharisees. This is not a casual dinner that we might have inviting our friends over to our house for dinner. In this culture, this was a formal meal that upheld, for the most part, a culture of honor and shame based on who was invited and where they were seated at the gathering. James Edwards, in his commentary on the gospel from Pillar New Testament commentary, mentions that their culture of honor and shame revealed who was set closest to, as the invited guest, was set closest to the guest of honor, actually the host in the meeting. Okay? The host, by invitation to such a meal, was actually doing this. He was honoring the folks who were invited, and this is kind of the cultural statement that he was making. He was basically saying this, that your relationship with me is as important as my relationship with my family members who sit at the table with me. And I'm inviting you to come just like I would invite my family to come to the table and eat with me. That's the level of this invite to join me at the table. That's their culture. Your relationship is that important to me. Now, at the table, there would be a pecking order to who sat where based on the host's decision regarding the importance of the guests. As you will see, the seating decisions were made by the host. Along with such an invitation to such a dinner like that, there would be a cultural expectation by the host to invite those seated at the table with him to engage in lively discussion, typically intellectual or discussion, with the colleagues that were sitting around the table. There was tremendous social status with such meals and such invitations. Such a meal in that day was well planned and orchestrated by the host, particularly to elevate the host's honor and cultural and community respect amongst the colleagues that are there at the table. In other words, the gossip mill would elevate those sitting at the table with the host and where they sat. But there's something else going on here in this scene that you would not expect in this setting to be taking place. You see, there's a man with dropsy at this meal. And the term there that's being used is a medical term. And it's defined this way in the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible. It's defined as an accumulation of watery fluid in tissue in spaces or in the body, according to the definition. What it basically means is this person was full of water and retaining water, and his disease would have been evident to all those who would see him. And therefore, he would be considered unclean because of the dropsy that he had. And he would be unclean because their culture would have seen him unclean because of the sin they believed was related to that disease. Therefore, the ruler of the Pharisees, folks, would not be present with this man in any way. He wouldn't be there yet. Here, this man is at his house in such a prominent and visible meal. He's there. So for me, there seems to be something going on. And I wrote it this way, there's some trickery or tomfoolery afoot by the ruler of this Pharisees. It appears that this meal might be a setup for Jesus as they're watching him carefully, as the text mentions. Apparently, this ruler and the Pharisees and his colleagues, including the scribes, are into setting Jesus up to take a fall, to get something on him in order to make their case, which might even launch their career even better, their status and their position amongst people in the community. The text indicates that Jesus was aware of what was taking place because he asked the question that they are looking to trip him up with at the meal before the discussion has even begun to take place at the table. Jesus sees the man with dropsy, knows he's been set up because he's not supposed to be there, and he assumes the question that they want answered, and he asks it and he answers it. Now, this is where my thoughts go. What does this say about the heart of the Pharisee with regards to the religion that he offers? What example does he set for the community when the very one who calls this man unclean and instructs others not to be present with him uses him in this way to potentially trap Jesus while breaking all the rules he wants others to abide by? And this question comes: how far will he go to be right and Jesus be wrong? Now, it's really easy to point the finger at the malicious heart of this Pharisee, but one of the enormous truths that I've had to wrestle with in my own faith and my own walk is the utter depth of my own depravity, my sinful heart. And so I come to this question: can I be this Pharisee peddling a religion that I want others to follow, but when it doesn't fit my agenda, I choose not to follow it myself? Can I be that Pharisee? Maybe that's why none of the Pharisees at the dinner table responded to Jesus when he asked the question about whether it was okay to heal on the Sabbath or not. Maybe, just maybe, they knew he knew what was going on. And his question shone light in the darkness of their heart regarding their malicious plan and their intent. They were so much about the mission, their mission to get something on Jesus, that they would do this. They would use an innocent man's disease to bait while violating their own religious standards in order to trap Jesus. That just blows me away. What depravity of heart is on display? Yet, I wrestle with that in me. You see, Paul said it this way in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. He said, "Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall." You see, with one or two wrong decisions, I can quickly find myself in the same boat with this Pharisee. It's real easy to want to one-up someone in order to look good in front of others, especially when you're in a leadership role and especially when there's contention between you. It's really easy to justify scheming and planning. And this is where my heart goes when I consider all the planning that took place. Can my heart be like this ruler of the Pharisees? Can I be like this? Let's return to our text as Jesus observes another difficult heart matter when the guests who are invited scurry around to pick the best seats of honor at the dinner table. We pick up in verse 7. Now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, and I'll pause there for a minute. As I mentioned in the opening, typically there were seats of honor at wedding and banquets, like I mentioned, so there were seats of honor here at the Pharisees' table. In their culture of honor and shame, such meals had the person sitting closest to the host, that person was perceived as being of higher honor than others who were sit further away from the host because he was the closest. I'm going to use it in nowadays language. He was closest to the man. This is the guy. I'm in. He's the guy. He was closest. The further away from the man that you set, the less respect that you receive. So can you picture this scene? I want you to picture this scene. That all the guests are arriving for this party, and it's like, what's that kid's game with the chairs? ring around, well, what is it? Musical chairs. That's what I picture. Actually, I had another picture. I had a picture of when you arrive at a concert or something like that, and you rush in and you throw all your clothes on six seats to make sure you get those seats for the concert. That's the picture. They're playing musical chairs, or they're playing that, and they're scurrying quickly to pick the best seat next to the man. And Jesus said this after he witnessed that. When you're arriving by someone, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who is invited, he's invited you both, will come to you and say this, give your place to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. See, realize what's happened now by you rushing to where you were to sit, and that wasn't the seat for you. No other seats are available. Now you're being moved to the least seat. That's the picture, the lowest place. But when you are invited, listen, go and sit in the lowest place so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. There's the potluck supper etiquette coaching, in my opinion. This culture of self-promotion permeated the Jewish Greco-Roman society in that day. Not only has the Pharisee performed in this manner, but so have the guests invited to the parties, exampled by their rushing to take the best seats in the house in order to be recognized as the most important to the host. And folks, we unfortunately have seen the same in our culture and our world today. Rather than a culture that humbles itself and serves others behind the scenes without a desire for status and power and position and recognition, we seem plagued in our culture today with the same issues. Just took a look at the politics of our day. We seem to be plagued by the same issues. Jesus seems to be addressing this very matter when he concludes this parable with this statement, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The Apostle Paul said it this way in Romans chapter 12. He said, for by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of the faith that God has assigned. Paul's coaching here is for us to have sober judgment of ourselves, of oneself, right-minded thinking about oneself, self-controlled in how we humbly perceive ourselves. By the way, I believe such right-mindedness is not done to receive a promotion to a higher seat at the table. That would be the exact opposite of what Jesus and Paul are talking about here. Paul's coaching is that there is no need for self-promotion. Listen, because all we have to do is be faithful with what God has given us in the measure of faith and the gifting that he's given us. And listen, folks, we let God handle the seating chart. It's his job. He's the host. He will arrange who sits where with regards to the places of honor at the master's table. He'll take care of that. This thought leads to the last section of Luke chapter 14 for today's message. Here we go, verse 12. He said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. Now, this is a cultural thing in their day. I'm not so much thinking it's a cultural thing in our day, but in their day, if you hosted something like this, and you were invited, there was a reciprocal invitation that was to be paid back. And Jesus goes on, but when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. And you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Now, two quick questions crossed my mind after reading this portion before we get to the last. Why does Jesus deter us from inviting friends and relatives to dine with us, but encourages us instead to invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind? I mentioned above, the cultural expectation would be an obligation of a reciprocal invite after being invited. Therefore, one might invite because of the expectation to have an invite reciprocated, a reward, if you will, for a return on your original investment. There would be no such invitation requirement of the poor, the crippled, the lame, or the blind. And like I said, I don't know that our culture today has this obligation to reciprocate, but it was part of their culture. And then I wrestled with, how do I do this? Do I invite family and friends rather than the poor, the lame, the blind, the cripple? For the most part, the ones I regularly invite are the ones on the first list, not the ones on the second. Seldom do I invite from the list that Jesus suggests. I think Jesus instructs this way because we naturally will already invite family and friends, but not folks from the other list. Now remember who Jesus is addressing his remarks to: the ruler of the Pharisees and the scribes and his colleagues sitting at the table. They would never invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, because they would be unclean in their eyes. All the while, they're the purveyors of the truth of God's word. They're the ones respected in the community for being in connection with God and purveying his truth. Here's the second of these two quick questions then, as a follow-up. Can I be as selective about who's at my table as the ruler of the Pharisees has been? That's a difficult kingdom question to wrestle with. I wrestle with it. Back to our text, verse 15. When one of those reclining at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." But he said to him, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many." Jesus is telling another parable here. "And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those he had invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first one said to him, 'I've bought a field and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and he reported these things to the master. And then the master of the house became angry, and he said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you commanded we have done, and still there's more room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.'" As I mentioned, I believe God's the host, capital H, in these parables. He's made the invite. In the second invite, those who received the invite decided not to come. Why? It's interesting for me, there are reasons. I've mentioned it in the past in a quote I've used quite often. John Piper mentioned it. And the 3 reasons he mentioned in his book, A Hunger for God, the 3 reasons were a piece of land, a yoke of oxen, and a wife. Piper called them, they were gifts from God. They denied the invite because of a piece of land, a yoke of oxen, and a wife. All of these are gifts from God, and yet they became more important, those things, than dining at the master's table in the kingdom of God. These invites were apparently to the closest friends of the master. For me, this is again one of the scary passages of Scripture in Luke's gospel. I mentioned this before in the past that Paul might have decided never to marry for this very reason, because although marriage was a gift from God and allowed, Paul potentially knew it would distract him from his 100% being focused on the master. So rather than being distracted by a piece of land, a yoke of oxen, or a wife, Paul chose not to. I'm reminded of the seed that fell among the thorns in the parable of the seed that Jesus told in Mark chapter 4. And other are the seeds that are sown among the thorns. They are those who hear the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. When those closest to the master turn down the invite because of the things that are gifts, the things that, the other things that they have, what does it say to the master? Look what the master does when his closest friends turned him down on the invitation. He sends his servants to the lame and the blind, the poor and the crippled. He sends his servants to the highways and the hedges in order to compel them to come in. At the end of this parable, the master says to his close friends who denied the invite, "You will not taste of the banquet." That is a scary parable for someone so close to the master. It's a scary parable. Distracted by the things of this life. Piper actually called it idolatry. He says it's scarcely recognizable and almost incurable. That's how Piper described those three things that distracted. So, I come back to where we started. Why wrestle with this text? This potluck etiquette. I follow that with these questions. Is God speaking to me? Who might I identify in this text, in these parables? Who might I identify with? Can I be the ruler of the Pharisees, setting Jesus up? Can I be the one rushing to grab the best seat in the house? Can I be the one who thinks more highly of himself than I ought? Can I be the master's friend who rejects the invite because the cares of this life have replaced my relationship with the master, my deep relationship with the master? Can I be that one? Can I be this one? The one who opens my dinner table to all who would gather there, regardless of their status, their place in life, or their sin, no matter. Can I be the one who opens a seat at my dinner table? All might be legitimate questions as we come to communion this morning. We're going to partake of communion this morning. If you grab the cup on the way in, these all might be legitimate questions. I'll follow them with this. How's your potluck supper etiquette? How is God speaking in your heart at this present moment regarding your dinner table? Might you consider that in prayer as we come to partake of communion this morning? How do I do my dinner table in honor of Him? This do in remembrance of me. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for the opportunity to come and share your word. I pray, Father God, as we come to partake of this meal right now that represents your body and your blood given for us. I pray, Father God, maybe we'll reflect on our personal dinner table in the parable that Jesus told. What does our relationships look like with those that you've given us in this life? I pray, Father God, as we come to partake, may you guide and direct our thought processes in our prayer life and how we, Lord, should respond. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. If you grab a hold of the top layer of that, you can peel it back, and you'll find the wafer there that represents Jesus' body given for you. He said this, take, eat all of it. Let's partake together. this morning. And then at the dinner table that night with the 12 disciples, he took the cup and he said, "This is a new covenant in my blood. As often as you drink it, do this in remembrance of me." Let's partake together this morning.